What's going on, everyone? First off, welcome and thank you for joining me on today's webinar where we'll be reviewing the first round of fund flow data for the new year, as well as other ways to track or analyze flows within the website. My name is Kyle Gears and I'm the Senior Customer Success Manager for our asset management clients. Should you have any questions for me throughout the webinar, you can submit them on the left-hand side of your screen and I'll be sure to follow up with the information that you're looking for. Please note that the content of this webinar is meant for educational purposes only and is not intended to be used as investment advice, nor is YCharts acting as an advising party regarding client funds in any way. Finally, also want to mention that we'll post a recording of this webinar to the support topics page of YCharts, and we'll also send out a copy to all attendees. Now let's go ahead and get rolling here. As far as today's agenda goes, we're going to break up the webinar in three parts. First and foremost is our traditional YCharts fund flow report, which gives you an insight into where assets are moving, what's going on in the markets, and allows you to analyze all of the data made available to you in a very clean format. Then we'll talk about visualizing the fund flows and using tools like comp tables to customize just a little bit of that fund flow data based on certain needs on your end. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a couple tips and tricks to help monitor information like fund flows and being able to set alerts on the data so you don't have to manually go in and look at flows or pull big reports anytime you want to keep tabs on the funds that are most important to you. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the fund flow report. And this is our traditional fund flow report. We'll start out with the original beloved YCharts fund flow report. And for those unfamiliar with it, you're going to want to make it a priority to review it on a monthly basis as it provides extremely valuable information and insights. The fund flow reports are exclusive and not everybody receives them, which is why they are not hosted directly on the site. All clients do receive the report via email around the 15th of each month for the prior month's flows. The reason being, we have to ensure that every last fund and ETF has reported its flows in full to ensure accurate data. Now, as far as this fund flow report goes, the first page contains some general index information and returns on some key indices, and the data is as of the previous month's end to be consistent with the flow data. So you have the index data on the first page, as well as some economic data as it relates to rates or key economic indicators. And then as we scroll down, we get into the fun part where we have our fund flows, and we rank the flows based on last month. So as of this recording, the most recent month was January. The updated flow information comes in on a monthly basis or month-end basis. So the last month, we saw global neutral balanced, global equity, global fixed income, global fixed balance, and Canadian fixed income balanced as the top 5 categories with inflows. And we're basically focused on this 1 month column right here. However, we do have additional support for flows over additional timeframes, as well as average performance or the Morningstar category average. As we go further down the list, you see that we break out each individual category to show the top 5 funds. Now, what I will note on these sections is that we look at the industry as a whole. We don't clean up the data or choose specific share classes. We're just looking industry-wide here. So you might see some different share classes coming in as the top 5, but I'll provide a little bit more info on that later on how to whittle that list down to a share class that you'd be interested in seeing. But here you break out the top 5 funds that saw the largest inflow for that particular category. And everything's conditionally formatted so you can easily follow along who's getting the larger flows, and then you can take a look to the right-hand column here and determine whether or not performance could be attributed to those flows possibly, if it's sort of a momentum play or if that's why everybody's sort of piling into that trade. So a lot of global we're seeing, and wondering if that might be an effect of a falling US dollar. A lot of folks are talking about exposure internationally or to emerging markets right now as some of the prime opportunity out there. So as we continue to scroll down the list, we see the categories, we see the funds, and then the associated performance. And we split these reports out to show top flows for mutual funds, top outflows for mutual funds, as well as ETFs, as we'll see in this section coming up. So next we have our mutual funds, and here we see Canadian money market actually the top in outflows, meaning investors are unloading their cash back into the market, which is always nice to see, because we did have quite a bit sitting on the sidelines since the pandemic, and we're still not back to pre-pandemic levels. We also have Canadian dividend, neutral balanced, equity balanced, and European equity that we're seeing outflows in. Our next section is going to cover ETFs. And here we're seeing Canadian fixed income, international equity, Canadian equity, global equity, and financial services. So once again, a lot of international or global with the falling US dollar that has played a major role in the opportunities abroad. And financial services, we've been seeing a lot of too. We've been seeing that in the US as well. A lot of people getting into banks because it might be the value play. We might have seen a shift in the tactical allocations, growth versus value. Value has done very well over the last 3 or 6 months, and that might be a play on value, the financials, or it could even be a play on rates. So when you're looking at these reports, you have all the data here, and I almost like to think of it as almost between subjective and objective, because you have all the data, but it's just a matter of how you'd like to interpret it, or what sort of story you can build based off of it. So as we continue to kind of scroll down here past all of the inflows, we see all the green conditionally formatted areas, and then you can take a look once again on the right side to see if that performance matches up. And last but not least, we have outflows for ETFs. So here we have precious metals. So it looks like a lot of investors might have given up on the gold trade or the silver trade or any other precious metals based on the thought of inflation, and especially with the US printing all the money for the stimulus and the Fed providing liquidity. Once again, Canadian money market ETFs seeing outflows. Energy, that might change near term with the price of oil increasing recently. Then preferreds and European equity. And once again, just breaking down the specific products that have been seeing outflows, looking at those historical flows, paints a really, really good picture to provide insight to yourself or even your clients. This is something that I would highly encourage you to share with your clients as well, so that they become more knowledgeable on where assets are moving. So one thing I want to point out on this particular report, and one limitation of the report itself, is the fact that you're only looking at 5 total funds for each individual category. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's great, but I want to see a longer list. I want to see the full picture. One nice thing about this report is it's actually interactive. So I can come in here and take a look for global neutral balance, for example, and you can click on it and it links to a list in YCharts. I'm a fan of right-clicking on it and opening that link in a new tab just to keep what I have here in the report. But I right-click, I open it, and that's the beauty of YCharts, is you can open multiple tabs since it's fully web-based. This is pulling in quite a bit of data, so it's going to take a minute or two to load, but now we have a full list in what's called the comp tables tool. So we're pulling in every global neutral balanced mutual fund, and we're looking at share class flows here. So if I want to look at the individual fund flows, I see I have a couple different share classes here. I can use a filter by clicking this list option up near the top, choosing the funds tab, and then share class. I open up my Canadian share classes, and if I mostly work with advisors that are using fee-based advice share classes or F shares, I can choose that and limit that list. So I know who my competitors might be, I know the space well, and you see who's getting assets and who's losing assets. So now once that's in the table, we filter down to F shares. We can sort by ascending and descending order. So we can see the inflows and flip it in the opposite direction, and also see the outflows there. So once again, you get the full picture of what's going on in that space. The other downside to this report is the fact that you only have a specific amount of categories, where you might want to see, take a step back and have a better overview of all the equity and fixed income categories. Well, good news on that front. We actually developed a newer report that covers specific factors and strategies. So this report, like I said, more of a high-level overview of all of the different categories across the board in equity and fixed income. So this report gives you just that. We have our equity strategies up top, and this report is structured a little bit differently. So here we have the combined flows, taking into account both mutual fund and ETF flows. You have the category returns on the right in this first section. And then the second section, it's the exact same categories, but here we actually break out mutual fund flows versus ETF flows. And once again, the conditional formatting kind of tell your eyes where to go and shows you exactly where you're seeing outflows, what categories are seeing inflows, and does a great job of helping identify that. So international equity, 1.2 billion in terms of combined flows. Emerging markets, 600 million. So those are definitely things to take note of as you're having discussions with clients. I mean, there's a reason that a bunch of assets are piling into those categories, and there's definitely narratives to support that. Then as we scroll down, we take a look at our fixed income categories, and once again, fixed income across the board tends to continue to see inflows. Not a whole heck of a lot of red here aside from long term, which nobody really wants to take on that duration risk right now. So it makes sense that everything's going into more so core products or shorter term, intermediate, and so on. But once again, taking a look here, you see some of the primary categories: Canadian fixed income, fixed balance, short term, and then global. So once again, this report allows you to kind of take a look at that higher level view of your equity and fixed income categories, and really tells the full story. Next, let's jump into the website and talk about how to customize this data a little bit. I mean, the reports are structured, it is what it is on the report, but you have a lot of flexibility within the tool to customize the data and exactly what you're looking at. So let's go ahead and hop into YCharts, and I want to talk to you about the fund screener. We already covered comp tables and the way that you can kind of manipulate or navigate the flow data there directly from the links within the fund flow reports. But if we go to the fund screener tool, this is going to be a little bit quicker. As you noticed earlier, the comp tables take a little bit longer to load the data, whereas the fund screener, you don't have that. It is much quicker. So I prefer to do a lot of the flow data within the screener. But you're essentially starting out with the entire fund universe, and it's up to you to filter that universe down to an area that you specifically would like to look at. So I'm going to click on the modify button here to get things going. That's always my first step. And usually the quickest and easiest way is to filter by category name. So I choose category name, Canadian fund categories. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to grab emerging markets equity, just because that's something that's of interest. It's coming up a lot in conversation, and you have the idea of the falling US dollar. So I'll go ahead and click submit. And now we're looking at a list of 454 emerging market equity funds. Very similar to what I mentioned earlier within that comp tables tool, I can go back to modify and I can actually choose the specific share class that I'd like to look at. So I go to modify, share class, Canadian share classes, and maybe I just want to see the F shares. Select it, click submit. Now we're down to 112 funds. Perfect. I could even take it one step further to clean this list up because we do see we're getting a couple different F shares. I can check this remove duplicates checkbox in the upper right-hand corner, and that removes all the smaller share classes, leaving me with the share class that has the largest AUM. Now we're down to 51 funds in the EM space. Now I can start pulling in that fund flow data in order to analyze this group. So if I go to my metric columns on the right-hand side, that's how I'm going to begin to choose the metrics. I click on add metric columns, I get a pop-up. If you know what you're looking for, you can come right to the type search. And what I want to pull in first is assets under management. I want to know who the bigger players are, and I want to see what the flows are relative to the total assets under management. So I type AUM, and we have it at the the total asset under management level, which aggregates all share classes, or we have the share class level, which is just specific to the share class that you're looking at in that line item. Most of the time, I want to aggregate those just to get the big picture. So I'm going to choose total assets under management. And then I can start pulling in flow data. And one of the easiest ways to find it is the rule of thumb that I use. I type in the time frame that I'm looking for. In this case, let's say it's a 1 month flow. I type in one space flow and I get a full list of results. Once again, we have the share class level as well as the fund level. Keeping things consistent, I'm going to choose the fund level. And then it reroutes me to the right-hand side, basically the section where that metric lives. So I have the 1 month, I can grab the 3 months, 6 month, 1 year, and that might give me some good perspective. So I'll go ahead and click submit, pull all that information in, and now I can navigate these tables. I can sort by ascending or descending order. I can see who's up top, who's got the most assets. And then on the flip side, I can start looking at things like 1 month flows. Who's seeing outflows? Flip in the opposite direction, who's seeing inflows? And you can do that for additional time frames and even save this screen down. So if this is something that I want to come back to at a later point in time, click the drop down in the upper left-hand corner, save as, call it EM fund flows. And when I want to pull this back up, analyze emerging markets, go back to my fund screener through the tools dropdown, click the upper left-hand corner, which is essentially my menu for the screener, click on my open folder, and I'll have all of my saved screens. And the last thing that I want to share with you during today's demonstration is going to revolve around the dashboard and your watch list. So Watchlist can also support fund flow data. If you have key watch lists where you're looking at some of your funds or maybe your fund versus a bunch of competitors, you can slot in fund flow data to track because it's important information. If one of your competitors is seeing outflows, you want to know that. And if an advisor that you work with holds that fund, you want to be able to call them and say, hey, I know this fund's seeing outflows. Maybe there's a reason behind that. Maybe the performance isn't all that hot. You can have that as a piece of engagement or a way to reach out to the advisor. And you can easily track that in your data tab within Watchlist. So we start you out with those 6 columns, but if there's something here that's taking up space that you're not interested in, you can remove it and replace it with flow data via the options dropdown in the upper right-hand corner. So if you click on options, add metric to data view, similar fashion, we'll search for one space flow. We'll have our 1 month fund flow. We'll slot that in. We can add additional time frames as well if you want a year to date or 1 year. You can add that in. And then the other trick as it relates to the watch list is the ability to set alerts on flows. So maybe you don't want to track flows manually day in and day out. You want to set an alert and automate that process. you can set an alert on any single watch list by going to your options dropdown and create/edit alerts. Now from here, you have to choose a metric to set the alert on. Let's say I want to be notified anytime 1 month flows for anything in my watch list go negative or they see outflows. So what I'll do is I'll use that 1 month fund level flow as the metric. And I have my toggle here. We want it to be less than or equal to. You can't use 0. That's going to give you a system error. So what I do is I just put -1 to keep things simple. -1 meaning $1 of outflows. So anything that goes below $1 in net flows or negative flows, that's going to send you a notification. So we'll go ahead and click create. We'll click done. It does not trigger retroactively, so it'll be set from this point going forward. But the areas that it's going to show up in, it's going to show up in the alerts tab. Once that alert is triggered, it'll show you a number next to the word alerts, and it'll show you exactly which fund triggered that alert and what the value was. It'll also send you an email in addition to showing up in your alerts inbox down at the bottom. So once again, that's going to be a great way to automatically track flow data and stay on top of your funds or competitors and seeing things such as outflows. That wraps up my demonstration portion. I hope all of the information that was shared was interesting to you, valuable to your process, and hopefully you picked up a new thing or two along the way. And we will send a copy of this webinar to all attendees in case you need to review anything that we talked about today, or if you'd like to share it with colleagues. We'll also be sure to follow up with a copy of the fund flow reports if you are not already on our mailing list. And we also appreciate any feedback that you might have. If you're new to YCharts and would like to know more about gaining access, feel free to reach out to me at kyle@ycharts.com. That's KYLE at YCharts.com. But once again, want to thank everybody for joining me today, and hopefully the time spent was valuable. Hopefully talk to you soon.